Okay.
All right. Well, hello everybody. My name is Marnie Reven, and I'm here to welcome you to tonight's Life Lecture sponsored by West Virginia Wellness Incorporated. And I'm actually going to turn my video off here for a minute. West Virginia Wellness Inc. is a 501c3 nonprofit organization created to bring complementary, holistic, alternative, and integrative medicine to the upper Ohio Valley and now throughout the world through lectures, health fairs, educational webinars, such as the one presented tonight. To find out more about West Virginia Wellness, you can go to Facebook or email us or call us at the number in the chat box. So I've put an informational chat in there. So this presentation is being recorded and will be available on Facebook under West Virginia Wellness Incorporated page. The views expressed by the practitioner may not necessarily reflect those of West Virginia Wellness, and we encourage our listeners to contact practitioners directly to find out more. So tonight our speaker is Dr. Gregory Gerdeman, and Dr. Gerdeman is a pioneer in researching the physiology of the endocannabinoid system and the biological rationales for cannabis as medicine. He has directed scientific activities at every level of medical cannabis supply chains, from pest management to extraction formulations to physician education. He has consulted extensively in the cannabis and hemp industries and is a frequent lecturer at conferences and continuing medical education events. He's currently the chief scientist at, and now is this Tennessee Pharmaceuticals, Greg? Or
Yes.
TN? TN Pharmaceuticals, and co-founder of WEIR, WEIR, Wellness Medical Cannabis Dispensary in Weirton, West Virginia, USA. He's also a voluntary assistant professor at the University of South Florida College of Pharmacy. So if any of you have taken the opportunity to search Greg online, you no doubt came away with an impression of a deep study and commitment in this area of health and wellness. With my search efforts, I could go on for the next hour talking about Greg's accomplishments, but that's not what we're here for. So without any further expansion on my part, I give you to Dr. Greg Gerdeman.
Thank you, Marnie. Yeah, thanks very much. Should I take over and put my slideshow on? Let's make sure we can
Yes, you
do
should.
that. Am I in control to do that?
I believe Jennifer gave everybody capacity.
Yes.
Okay, so I see my share screen button.
You should be
Okay.
able to.
And if I just see if this can be super easy, if I can just open my keynote.
Mm-hmm.
Any chance you're able to see that?
Nope, not yet. And if there's anything that you want to send me via email, I can go ahead and get it up if that would make it any easier.
Do you want me to make him a co-host? Because I did that for you, Marnie.
I think he can share screen, so I don't know that he needs to be co-host.
Okay.
I am trying to share the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And allow apps content.
So if we were in person, we'd have different issues, but our online fun is this usually.
I have done this before.
Sure.
But of course I've had probably Zoom will not be able to record the contents of your screen until it is quit later.
Huh.
I don't
So
know if
go
I have
ahead.
to restart Zoom.
Okay, go ahead and make him a host, Jennifer.
Okay.
It's fine.
Yeah, that's the way I've done it before.
Go ahead and make him a host. There you go.
Good to go.
Okay.
And let me kick it back to Zoom for a second and see if I can Share the screen now.
There we go.
Oh,
Is that
okay.
working?
You've
Yes.
got it.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Um, it is a pleasure being up here and trying to expand on the direction that I've taken from being an academic who comes to the world of cannabis from brain science and a lifelong student of the physiology underlying how cannabis works. I won't go into a long story about how I got there, but according to your, right along the lines with your mission, our company, Weir Wellness, is one of the first granted licensed dispensaries of medical cannabis in West Virginia, and we certainly aim to have a very holistic, complementary medical, practice as far as supplying the medicine to patients in the region. I have a science background. Two of our partners are nurses, and have a long history and deep interest in using cannabis as medicine with our patients. Um, Now, can you see my full screen right now, or is it, maybe I need to hit play here?
No, well,
How's that?
there you go. When you hit play, everything is like absolutely perfect now.
Okay, great.
Yes, great.
So there's me in 1999, and the work I was doing at Vanderbilt University Medical Center was basically investigating the brains of rodents, looking at rats and mice and trying to understand the cellular basis of learning and memory at a cellular level. And the first paper that we wrote, can you hear me now? I moved my microphone down a little bit because it was a little poppy.
We're hearing you just great.
There's a title of the first paper we published, and there's me in 20 years later as the chief scientist of one of the first medical cannabis companies in the state of Florida, where we had a handful of rooms that size growing medical cannabis in a greenhouse. My interests have always been on the neurophysiology and biology of endocannabinoid systems in humans and throughout animal life. I'm broadly interested in these things. And the biological mutualism between humans and cannabis, how we as species work together. So one way to start approaching this is asking, what is medical cannabis? There are lots of ways that you can start that, but there's sometimes a question people have of, is this a new thing? And one way, the answer is very decisively no. Cannabis is an ancient medicine with an extensive use in human history. There's good argument that it may have been the very first plant cultivated by humans. And you'll see that I get a kick on going into the history because I've got quite a few slides on it. But in other ways, it is new, at least in our lifetimes. State systems around the country have been legalizing cannabis mostly within the last 10 years for the first time since 1937. Although I'll say some things about the prohibition of cannabis as well, and it'll be very simplified. States were blocking it, some states well before 37, but 1937 is when cannabis became effectively illegal nationwide, and we've been in kind of a dark days in our relationship with this plant ever since. Modern breeding methods have created a very large diversity of cannabis varietals. This is something that's new. You will hear people who are concerned and expressing worry about cannabis, some of it with perfectly good intentions, saying that it's much stronger than it used to be. In some ways, that's true, which was largely a result of prohibition and breeding to have stronger, more potent product. But there's also a much more exciting real thing going on with cannabis being bred in the open with modern agronomy techniques to have a whole palette of different effects. A lot of this intersects with the world of aromatherapy and botanical medicine, and that you folks, many of you I know are into, and hopefully we'll discuss some of that at the end. And another way that it's different is that modern cannabis oil extracts are very popular. And interestingly, they're widely viewed as being more appropriate as medicine. When states legalize, oftentimes it's just legalizing these oils as though that is more controllable and medical than something as raw as a living, as a fresh cut or dried plant. Um, so there's a lot of new as well as old. I like to direct my talks in terms of what makes cannabis a medicine. First of all, there's ways to outline that it is, and if it is, what makes a medicine. Uh, okay, I see what's happening here. I borrowed some slides from a talk that was pre-recorded, and this animation is just going to take an extra moment because it's on a timer.
I did stick a question in the chat box just to clarify. Is that oil that you're talking about? Is that the CBD oil?
Some of it is, while
Okay.
I'm waiting for this, I may actually escape out of this. And so can you see my screen right
There,
now?
yes, we can see it now.
So
Yep, you're on your
as
way.
I'll go into some detail, I mean, this is meant to be an intro screen about kind of the big picture that I'm going to build up to, like, how do we get to know these things in some ways? And when you think about what makes cannabis a medicine, you have to look at, and this is true for any botanical, what is it in the plant that makes it medical, that has value in that way, has effect on us? And what is it in humans that responds to it? And we've figured out the first part earlier. Compounds that are present, that are made in these flowering tops of cannabis, are called cannabinoids. Shown here are THC, delta 9 THC, the infamous one, and cannabidiol, CBD. These two were both well discovered by the 1960s. And they're kind of like fraternal twins. They look very much alike, but they act quite differently. Delta 9 THC is, of course, the primary psychoactive driver. It's what makes you high. It's what leads to adverse outcomes of having too much and feeling anxious, but it is profoundly therapeutic. Cannabidiol is CBD, and that is present in different varieties of cannabis as well. What is now legally called hemp, I won't really go in, didn't really plan to talk about so much in this talk, but hemp is cannabis. Cannabis sativa comes in distinct chemotypes, we say. Some of them are THC dominant, some of them are CBD dominant, and some of them have a blend of each. Now, that blended THC and CBD balanced kind of cannabis is actually quite uncommon now, because for generations, farmers have grown hemp for fiber, and that tends to be the higher CBD content plant. And the drug market is bred for THC. And so these sort of lineages have split off to being gene pools where you've got THC rich cannabis and CBD rich cannabis that's in hemp. There's a lot going on now to make it much more diverse and interesting. Well, cannabis also has a variety of aromatic terpenes like limonene and beta-myrcene that are no stranger in the plant world. These are found all over the place, like in orange peels, for example, or in mangoes or hops. And they have therapeutic value as well, although it has been much more, until much recently, highly overlooked. And as I'll go into some detail later a little bit, these things work because in our body, we have molecules that have come to be called endocannabinoids, meaning endogenous cannabinoids, because they act like, especially like THC does. And these medical forms include oils. For example, if it's an extract of a CBD-rich hemp type cannabis plant, it will be a CBD oil. If it's an extract that would be available in a medical marijuana market, it'll be a THC tincture, for example. Okay, does that help? Let me pop into this slideshow again because this is busy at the start. Here's what I hope to get going on and guide us through. That cannabis and humanity have a long road together, and I kind of set up this talk to talk about sort of how things have changed and where they are now, and it's a very cursory overview. One could talk for days and days on this subject and write books on it, and there are many good books written about these things. So I'm going to take little snippets from the ancient world and what cannabis was, at what we know of cannabis's use in antiquity, all the way up to today, where we have a legal cannabis industry in the United States and happening worldwide. This is a global phenomenon that we're having this tide change of remembering this plant as a safe and effective therapeutic. So to start off in antiquity, this is very old. This is a version of ancient Kanji Chinese or pinyin that is a word for hemp, and it literally shows hemp drying under a barn. Now, there's evidence that hemp has been grown for fiber. There's archaeological evidence going back 10,000 years in Stone Age Taiwan. There's evidence from 2 or 3,000 years ago about cannabis for psychoactive properties, and I'll hit on some of that. We'll touch on a little bit of Western medicine and the use of cannabis up until 1937, when you had the USA leading the way with prohibition through the Marijuana Tax Act, and subsequently in the Controlled Substance Act of 1970. And then, I'm really going to focus on what I call the ECS science, the science of the endocannabinoid system, to try to emphasize to you that this change that's gone on about a reacceptance and greater understanding of cannabis than ever has largely been driven by science, tax-funded, NIH-supported science. That's where I got my start and have continued to be a role, even though I don't have a lab anymore. I certainly pay attention to it and help translate this science. There have been steps along the way. There are developments of cannabinoid pharmaceuticals that have come out of this science. There is the medical marijuana movement that pressured legal change. Then came, and I won't talk about this much more later unless we talk about it in the question and answer, but of course, a huge domino falling was this CBD phenomenon where kids with debilitating, really tragic childhood pediatric seizure disorders, epilepsies, were finding that CBD-rich cannabis extracts, meaning what we would call hemp extracts, were showing dramatic improvement with these children who were having sometimes dozens of seizures a day. And this is a picture of dear Charlotte Fiji, who sadly passed away from COVID-19 last year. And she really sparked a whole movement that has been a game changer, not only in CBD products and hemp as cannabis, but has been a shifted acceptance of cannabis as medicine in general. Okay, now again, I said I would spend a little time in antiquity. It's fun. And when one asks if cannabis is a source of legitimate medicine, there's a long history of human experience, and there's an ethnobotanical natural history talking to finding evidence of cultural use of cannabis in different pockets of the world, and there's archaeological evidence. I throw here a couple of references that are like real masterworks here. Clark and Merlin's book, Cannabis Evolution and Ethnobotany, and I'll show some different images from my friend and colleague Ethan Russo. Here's a paper of his that's open access. And here's a study that he went all the way to this remote northwest corner of China, where there is this cluster of well-studied tombs. And here was this individual, a male, who was buried in this tomb, and they were exceptionally well preserved because of how high and arid the climate is. And this individual was interpreted to be an important kind of shaman or medicine person in the community, because of being buried with certain spiritual elements. There's different implements that were indicating a station of importance and medicine use. And my animation got ahead of me, but I wanted to point out that this shaman was buried with a mortar and pestle and with a basket that had literally pounds of cannabis flower in it. And they were tested using modern methods and found that it was a high THC kind of cannabis. So this was someone who was using for, whether it was sacramental or religious or what we would call recreational use. We tend to think it was probably something that was taken very serious, but it was definitely psychoactive. And this was well over 2,000 years ago. Around the same time period, there's archaeological evidence that is very much more recent coming out of Israel. This is a shrine called the Shrine of Tel Arat that was uncovered. It was an important temple outside in Israel, dating to something around. There's like contemporaries here. I think it's around 700 BC. And in this interior chamber of the temple, and what was called the Holy of Holies, there were two altars shown here, and on the left was the higher altar here had residue. They both had bird residues in them, and one of them was cannabis, and the other one was frankincense. So here is evidence of sort of a sacramental um, re, religious use of cannabis in two different cultures, many thousands of miles away in the ancient world. And not only that, here's ancient Egypt. The Ebers Papyrus, this is a fragment of it. It's the oldest fully intact medical text in the world from 1550 BC, and highlighted is this word called Shemshemet. This is not controversial amongst those who interpret ancient Egyptian, that this is believed to mean cannabis. And it describes, this particular fragment describes the use of cannabis as a poultice for vaginal feminine suppository use, probably related to pain and cramping, one can assume. The Egyptian literature, I mean, the papyri from that time, these texts show other uses of cannabis, but this is the one from the Ebers Papyrus. And interestingly enough, this, using cannabis topically for like vaginal suppositories has come back, and it's always gets a giggle these days when people are putting a new product. Like, what are these weed people going to think of next? But it's literally documented in the oldest medical text that we have, which is some of the first writing in any language, because medical texts are always the most important to write down. One of the most well-known passages about cannabis is from the Greek historian Herodotus. And in his book, The Histories, there's a passage where he's describing the ancient Scythians who dominated Central Asia for many hundreds of years. And he's got this passage. They take some hemp seed, as it was translated, creep into the tent, throw the seeds onto the hot stones. At once it begins to smoke, giving off a vapor unsurpassed by any vapor bath one could find in Greece. The Scythians enjoy it so much that they howl with pleasure. Now, I will say that the seed of cannabis, even high THC cannabis, is not psychoactive. But if you look at the picture down below, the bract that surrounds the seed that it grows out of, which is in the flower, is where you get the densest. So this is probably referring to the flowering tops that still had seeds in it. And I like to challenge people reading this, what kind of images come to mind here? Because it always gets portrayed in a certain way. They're howling with pleasure. It kind of makes you like think of this like hedonic kind of sweat lodge experience. But if you read the passage in context, it was only done when someone in the community had died. It was part of a grieving ritual or a spiritual, part of what they were doing ritualistically in their view of the dead, but something very serious and perhaps a therapeutic approach towards trauma and healing and wellness. So I like to throw that out there as another piece of ancient medicine. Moving along, I'll look at my clock to make sure I'm not dawdling too long. Jumping ahead many hundreds of years, because again, there's lots of different examples of the use of cannabis in antiquity. And this gets brought up in the world, because I'm head first all the way in the deep end of cannabis as medicine as an industry. I defend it, I'm in it. And I debate people because it is not, of course, there's controversy around it. But it is sometimes dismissed by in conversation as well. Just because cannabis is ancient, okay, it's been used a long time, that doesn't make it a good medicine. That's true. There's all kinds of ancient remedies and cultural traditions that are not necessarily good medicine, even though they're old. But cannabis is something that has been used in a prominent way in dozens of civilizations that lasted hundreds of years across the whole globe. It's been cherished. It's been written about extensively, although it's really only in modern times that a lot of these things have been discovered as the world has gotten smaller with globalization and methods. Anyhow, Western medicine up till Prohibition, there's some highlights. One being this gentleman, Dr. William Brooks O'Shaughnessy. He's one of the giants in medicine that people don't remember well, an Irishman who worked in both Edinburgh, Scotland, and in Calcutta, India. This is his faculty picture from the Medical College of Calcutta. And amongst his many contributions, he started using what he called Indian hemp to treat epilepsy in other conditions, but the seizure disorders like tetanus. Tetanus is also a spastic condition. In fact, he published using this extract of what we would call cannabis indica, Indian hemp, um, to something like 9 out of 12 tetanus patients was one of his first publications. Now, tetanus was universally fatal at that time. They didn't know how to keep somebody surviving through that. And he formulated what he called Squire's extracts. He was commercial about it. He made an extract. He sent it to the British Isles, and it is very reasonable. There's evidence and reasonable to believe that Squire's extracts or variations of hemp tinctures were in every doctor's bag in Great Britain or London anyway in the 1850s or so, after he had been quite active and prestigious in medical publications. Up at the top right, this is an image I have from an encyclopedia. It's actually down here next to me, framed from I think my window's blocking it. 1878, an image of a flowering hemp plant that may very well have been familiar to Dr. O'Shaughnessy. And he influenced many of the people that we consider the fathers of Western medicine, like Sir William Osler, who ended up being a founding director of surgery at Johns Hopkins University. Uh, very distinguished. He basically wrote the first major textbooks on medicines. And he very explicitly wrote that cannabis indica is the most satisfactory remedy for treating migraines, for example. Okay. And again, 100 years ago, cannabis was a mainstay of American apothecaries. I showed here a couple pictures that I've taken from the collection of Donnie Wershafter over at the Cannabis Museum. For those of you living in the Ohio Valley, this is right over in Athens, Ohio. It's a highly recommended day trip. There's a picture of me looking at some old botanical prints of the two genders of cannabis. The Cannabis Museum is one of a handful of places around the world that have done a great job of documenting how the medicine was presented in the day. And again, this would have been in apothecaries all over the country, both as flour, as oils, as this on the right here. If you see this green bottle, I don't know if you see do you see my arrow moving around? No.
Yeah, we can see all of that. Yes.
Oh, okay. That says syrup of cannabis indica. So people, druggists as they were called at the time, but all of the antecedents of today's drug companies, pharmaceutical companies like Eli Lilly, Searle and Company, they were growing what they called cannabis americana, showed at the left, trying to compete with the Indian product and the African product in its potency. And they were making potent concoctions. So extracted cannabis that's highly potent is not a new phenomenon of the 1990s and the new century. Okay. And did we know that it was medicine? Organized medicine absolutely knew that cannabis was widely used. This is me. It was a picture I just took a little while ago, wearing the same clothes. This is a book I have recently obtained, the United States Dispensatory. This is the edition from 1937, which is a key year, as we'll see. But we know, and this volume was very widely read as sort of the key reference to interpreting expounding upon the pharmacopoeia of the United States, the approved number of medicines. And you look into the interest on cannabis, and it describes, I'll look at my screen to read that, this is manifest by a peculiar taking cannabis seems to be limited to exclusive action at the higher nerve centers. In man, this is manifest by a peculiar delirium, which is accompanied by, I'm going to move this, by exalted imaginative function, and later by a inability, loss of the sense of time. And down below, forgive me. Oh, I forget I'm not on a touch screen. That's why it's not working. Cannabis is used in medicine to relieve pain, to encourage sleep, and to soothe restlessness. That's all I'll read on this right now. But the bottom line is, you know, half a century later, more than half a century later, 80 years later, we're still in the same understanding that cannabis has utility for this common symptom cluster of controlling pain, controlling anxiety, and helping to sleep. That is the why it has so many different uses. But there's also a whole lot of physiology to it. Now, why am I saying this? I'm sorry, is there a question?
Waiting list? Wow. That's snooty.
I think somebody's not muted.
Yeah, we'll go through and mute everybody again. Sorry about that.
It's okay. So it's a
Okay. I muted you too. Shoot.
get it. Am I
Oh,
back?
there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I got it. It's all right.
Did my job way too well. All right. Sorry.
Now, the reason it's important to emphasize that medicine, organized medicine, and physicians in this country knew of cannabis's role as a medicine is because of what happened in 1937 with the real major part of cannabis prohibition. The real door slamming was with the Marijuana Tax Act of 37. And these are roots of our public health policy that need to be looked at, soberly. This is Harry Anslinger, who was the director of the narcotics director of the Treasury. He was sort of the first drug czar, and his rationales. These were words he spoke on in Congress. Is talking about how marijuana smokers in the U.S. are mostly Negroes and Hispanics and Filipinos, entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, and swing result from marijuana usage. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes and entertainers and any others. This is a vile kind of language. And there was a real xenophobia and racist motivation behind making cannabis illegal. The name marijuana was not known to physicians. When I'm looking in the dispensatorium and the pharmacopoeia, they refer to cannabis or maybe Indian hemp. But marijuana was a Mexican, Portuguese kind of slang phrase, and it was also derogatory in Mexico, but it was adapted into the US and passed and with no one really objecting except the American Medical Association. Now this cartoon, there's so much like propaganda kind of cartoons that one could show to talk about this era, but this is the one that has always impacted me the most when I first saw it. It's showing, marijuana being kicked out of the drugstore, and of course it's a drug crazed looking female in a bottle, and there's the dapper G-man looking on to make sure that the druggist, his foot says druggist, is doing his job to get rid of cannabis out of the pharmacies, the apothecaries of the day. And when you look back, if I can go back, well, the reason why we don't have all those artifacts, those glass bottles to show how prominent cannabis was, is because these government officials from the Treasury, they broke them. The reason why the Cannabis Museum in Athens, Ohio has the bulk of its collection is because a widow from Texas who was married to one of Anslinger's narcotics G-men, he went around the country, many of them did, seizing cannabis and breaking all the bottles, but he loved the glasswork, so he would keep some, and by the time he died, his widow had a whole garage full of these beautiful glass bottles, and decades later they've ended up at the Cannabis Museum. Okay, so that was the Marijuana Tax Act, and that's what was the law of the land. I won't go into description about what the Marijuana Tax Act actually did, but it made it impossible to really grow cannabis in this country. And it was supplanted in 1970 by the Controlled Substance Act, which created the modern scheduling that we have, where cannabis is considered Schedule 1, the most prohibitive substance that by definition means it has no accepted therapeutic value, medical value, and it cannot be administered safely to patients. And it's just patently absurd when you look at our own recent US history. All right, so taking a sidestep back to the plant, what is medical cannabis? What does it look like? How does it work? Um, some preparations, again, are ancient. These are a variety of different ways that cannabis has been known and consumed for thousands of years. On the top left, you've got basically the harvested flowers, and this is from India, where it's called bhang. Um, Below that, you have the resin of the flowers that are collected in different ways, either called hashish or charas if it's just rubbed by hand. Um, the active, dusty sort of glands that are on these flowers can be sifted, dry sifted into what's called keef that can be made into hash. Um, and a term you may see sometime is called sinsemilla. The sinsemilla is the more robust flower that the female cannabis flower creates when males have been removed. If the flower is not allowed to be pollinated, it grows bigger and larger and gains more of the active ingredients. And it doesn't make seed because it hasn't been pollinated. And sin semilla literally in Spanish means without seed. And these techniques have been known for generations in other countries. And now in the modern cannabis industry, everything is grown as sinsemilla, which does make it more potent. And again, the medicinal, you know, the marvelous medicinal chemistry of cannabis occurs in these stalked glands called the glandular trichomes. This isn't unique as far as anatomy goes. A lot of plants have trichomes. Aromatics like basil could look just like this if you zoomed in on close of them. But cannabis flower produces an abundant amount of trichomes, and this is where those cannabinoids and terpenes are generated. Again, we've known it for a long time. Here's that same encyclopedia entry from 1878 showing a stalked glandular trichome, and just some close-up image of a harvested cannabis flower, and then a picture I attribute to this Instagram account. If you want to look at macro pictures of cannabis trichomes, the internet abounds with them. It's difficult photography, but a lot of people love to do it. So what's in there? This is what makes cannabis such a impactful, uh, uh, inebriating sometimes medicine. Um, but starting at the end of the 1800s, chemists had discovered that morphine morphine was an active constituent of opium. Um, the molecular basis of medicine was well underway. There was even the Bayer Company, which invented heroin. They set out a competition amongst chemists to try and discover the active principle of cannabis because it was very tricky to isolate because of its oily nature. It wasn't really until having a delay here. It wasn't really until the early 1960s that Meshulam and Gaoni, working in Israel, hold on, I don't know why that was delayed, um, developed, got the solid molecular structure of the cannabinoids, delta-9 THC and cannabidiol. Um, and I'll be brief here, but there's a wonderful documentary about Rafi Meshulam, who is just one of the most important scientists in the world from my perspective, called The Scientist. And if you Google The Scientist documentary, it's available free on YouTube, and it's really great for telling this story. But so in the 60s, we understood that what these cannabinoids are. Oh, wait, hold on. And then we enter, actually, since let me go back to this slide where we've covered sort of these entry to Western medicine, discovering
Now you have completely frozen. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I hear you, Marnie.
Yeah, he's totally,
Yes.
what happened?
Disconnected.
I don't know.
Going back to that slide, maybe.
Maybe, but Dr. Greg, you are totally frozen. You might have to sign out and come back in. I'm gonna text him real quick. Okay, so he's gone out. He'll come back in.
Yep, looks like we've lost him altogether.
Oh, his power went out and he lost his internet.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh, no.
Tragic.
Well,
where is he coming from?
Oh, he's right here. He's local in probably the northern panhandle there.
Okay, because I'm in Wheeling and I keep losing my internet too.
Yes, so that is what's going on. We'll wait a little bit here. Carol's is flickering. We are all, for those of you who are not local in West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, we're having all those storms that came up out of the south that have caused so many problems in Alabama and Mississippi and such. And so we are having severe storms. So
it's the wind.
It is. It's the wind. We're having hail. We're having lightning and thunder. So no, it may not work. And if it doesn't work, we will invite Dr. Gerdeman to come back and finish his talk. But it was fascinating. Oh my gosh.
It was much more interesting than I was anticipating. I'm not a big proponent of the marijuana and the CBD. It's just, I don't have anything against it. It's just not something that has been really on my radar. But I found this far more interesting so far than I had anticipated. He's a very good presenter. Yeah, very good presenter.
I'm thinking we might have a field trip there in
Athens.
Yeah.
Board retreat to Athens, huh?
There you go.
So go ahead, if you would, KJ, go ahead and put yourself on the screen. I will introduce everybody to everybody. And while we're maybe about 5 minutes. Oh, it's back on, but rebooting the router. Okay. So while we have a second here, I'm going to make some introductions. KJ Burley is the West Virginia Gypsy, and she's the founder of West Virginia Wellness. It has been around for about 6 years now, right?
We officially incorporated in April of 2017, following the very first alternative wellness fair in the fall of 2016. That I just started putting a wellness fair together in response to questions that I was hearing from my therapeutic massage clients about types of therapy. What do you know of this? And do you know someone who does that? And where can I find this? So I started putting together a wellness fair and inviting practitioners. Carol, our resident naturopathic doctor, joined in and immediately said, what can I do to help? And one of the folks that we discovered at that time was a young lady by the name of Cheryl Collega from Pittsburgh, who is a registered pharmacist, but she practices something called iridology as well as an alternative form of wellness. And she was one of the first presenters at the first wellness fair. So in April of 2017, okay, so in April of 2017, Cheryl, Carol, and I got together and we incorporated West Virginia Wellness, and we've been plowing ahead ever since. So welcome back, Greg. And if the power goes out again, let's plan to reschedule for maybe next week sometime.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. Thank you. It was just a flicker, but it knocked the router
that
out.
was enough, huh?
Yeah.
Are you still co-host?
I just made him co-host.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, so
if everybody can please mute themselves except Marnie and Dr. Gerdeman.
Okay. Are we back here?
You are back up at that slide where we.
I'll try to pick up the pace here. Where I was at is sort of the modern, where discoveries started happening as to how cannabis really works, because the science knew for some decades after Meshulam's discoveries that THC was the active ingredient. Well, actually, and that's an interesting reality, because for decades it was, what they did was they showed that when they isolated THC and gave it to human subjects, it caused the inebriation and feeling of being high on hash oil, and delivering CBD did not have a psychoactive effect, and other sort of fractions of the oil did not have a psychoactive effect. So because of the cultural and scientific sort of prerogative to see cannabis as just a psychoactive drug of recreation, it got assumed that THC was the only active constituent. And for decades, almost the only thing studied was THC. There are very notable exceptions. CBD was studied for psychosis in Brazil, and there were studies out of Israel showing CBD having effects on epilepsy. These are studies that were done in the late 70s and early 80s, that CBD had these properties, and we've gone decades without fully exploring it until here we are now, 2021, and CBD is finally an FDA approved drug for epilepsy and has a lot of promise as an antipsychotic, but research was done way back then. Well, anyway, how did THC work? There was much confusion, but it wasn't until what was called the CB1 cannabinoid receptor was scientifically discovered that we understood the real primary target. And this cannabinoid receptor sits on cells and responds to THC, was identified in 1988. It was cloned, as we say, in 1990 and this work was at NIH by Dr. Miles Herkenham. And that just means it was discovered like what the DNA sequence is. We know exactly what this gene is that encodes a receptor for how THC works. And lo and behold, it was all over the brain. Now, you all may not be used to looking at slides of the brain, but these are brain slides from different species, and they've been stained in a way to show where the CB1 receptor is. And in many different areas of the brain, CB1 is found. In fact, CB1 receptors are the most abundant of what are called the G protein coupled receptors in the entire mammalian brain. Our brain is teeming to be responsive to THC and cannabis, which really opened eyes. Like, wow, we knew it got you high, but all of these areas related to motor function, to procedural memory, to emotion, to orientation, to all kinds of higher cognitive abilities are highly packed with cannabinoid receptors. This is an image shown from a molecule that was created several years later by Merck to use PET imaging to show where the CB1 receptor is. And so we have the CB1 receptor in the brain, and science quickly found a different cellular receptor that was named CB2 because it was identified with DNA homology to CB1. They're closely related. Evolutionarily, they came from one another through a genome division event. And CB2 was found in immune cells of the circulating immune system. And very early, this is the early 90s, it was found that activation of this receptor, including by THC, inhibits the migration and sort of the chemoattractive properties of various monocyte-derived cells like microglia and macrophages, which are the mediators of inflammation. So in the mid-90s, we had good evidence that cannabis could be a powerful anti-inflammatory agent, which hadn't really been explicitly understood before. CB1 and CB2, there's so much science that's known that I'm not even going to go into, but this is as mainstream as science gets. There are thousands and thousands of studies about what these cannabinoid receptors do to regulate physiology and wellness. One common theme between them primary function is that CB1 in the nervous system regulates neurotransmitter release and it reduces the excitability of cells, which makes a lot of sense when you think about how it controls seizure activity. In the CB2 receptors in the immune system act similarly, only instead of regulating and dampening the release of excitatory neurotransmitters, they dampen the release of pro-inflammatory mediators like these interleukins and other cytokines that stimulate inflammation. Well, how do they do it naturally? Because these molecules that I've mentioned exist. They were discovered in the mid-90s. Anandamide or arachidonyl ethanolamide was the first. And in a wonderful scientific twist, anandamide was discovered also by the lab of Rafi Mechoulam in 1994, 50 years after he had discovered THC. And the name Ananda comes from Sanskrit, meaning an internal bliss, and this molecule with an amide bond on it was called anandamide. And 2-AG is the other one. It's less attractively named. And here I have another time delay because of where I borrowed these slides from, but this one isn't going to be very long, as we just saw. But these are the endocannabinoids. They're lipid molecules. They're oily. They come from the cellular membrane itself, which is quite different than most molecules, transmitters that are packaged in vesicles and released. So the whole biology of endocannabinoids is different. It's special amongst signaling molecules, and it helps to maintain homeostasis or balance within physiological systems. We first understood this with the neuronal endocannabinoid system in neurons. So here's just a cartoon of a neuron. It's a long projection to hit target cells. The endocannabinoid system, as we came to discover, is something that happens in reverse. It's a retrograde signal where when a target cell receives excitation from a nervous impulse or some other cellular input, endocannabinoids are released and travel backwards or in a retrograde way to tune down or fine tune its own synaptic inputs. This is really something that changed 100 years of dogma about how the nervous system works. The idea that the flow of information goes one way in neurons from receiving dendrites down this long axon to where a neurotransmitter is released. This was proposed by the father of neuroanatomy, Ramon Santiago y Cajal, or Santiago Ramon y Cajal, rather, in the late 1800s. And the endocannabinoids finally turned it on its head, literally. So cells fine-tune their own inputs by releasing endocannabinoids to act at the CB1 receptors that are on those terminals. And now we know much more about it. I mean, cells even regulate their own electrical activity in real time by releasing endocannabinoids in different microdomains around the cell. And so this is an intrinsic regulation by which brain circuits and target tissues keep themselves in the right balance. And it's important for health and well-being. One of the very technical ways we discovered this is as a major tool of modern biomedical research, mice were genetically engineered to lack the CB1 cannabinoid receptor, so-called CB1 knockout mice. This first happened in the lab of Andreas Zimmer at NIMH. And I ended up being one of the first people to work with these mice myself in the late 90s. And I was privy to, there's an anecdote here I'm going to tell you that people don't know. It was never published. But when they first bred these mice, and these brain scans show that indeed the mouse that's been genetically knocked out has no CB1 receptors, they kept finding these mice would be dying quickly, and they didn't know what was going on. It turned out that in the animal care facility, the facility was working on the elevators, and they would keep holding the elevator doors open and causing the kind of alarm that happens. And that enough of a stimulus with the alarm going off down the hall was causing these mice to go into seizures to the extent that they died. And Dr. Zimmer's group quantified this through looking at, well, not with the elevator effect, but just looking at the lifespan of these mice. You see, this is a survival curve. And going out 24 weeks, which is through the lifetime of a mouse, those mice that are missing this receptor with no, alarm stimulus whatsoever, they've ended up dying. It's 30% of them are dead within 2 weeks. So this receptor that is activated, discovered because it was activated by THC, is critically important for maintaining a healthy life. And this is where I got into it. I made this a little bit of a retrospective in that my first paper had the honor of being named an editor's choice in Science magazine. And I highlight here, this is technical, right? It's showing that Gerdeman and my mentor, David Levinger, showed that activation of CB1 receptors causes inhibition of glutamate release from presynaptic terminals. This is technical jargon, but the reason why it was chosen as a editor's choice in the science publications of the week is because of its implications for neuroprotection. And indeed, within a few years, we start seeing just an avalanche of papers with reviews like CB1 cannabinoid receptors as an on-demand defense against excitotoxicity, endocannabinoid signaling as a synaptic circuit breaker in neurological disease. These are the most prominent mainstream journals of peer-reviewed institutional science on the planet. It's as mainstream as science gets, and this is 15 and over years ago that science has been talking about the endocannabinoid system, the target of cannabis, as like our brain's innate system of defending itself and protecting itself from toxicity. And yet, when it comes to using cannabis as medicine, still so much controversy that we can't even get into trials. Aside from neuroprotection, and there's a lot of words here that makes it busy, but this same fundamental biology I've just explained to you has gotten more and more sophisticated, where at root, the term I used to describe in 1999, endocannabinoids are used to fine-tune their own synaptic inputs. This is applied in circuits all over the brain and spinal cord. For example, we know that the endocannabinoid system, the CB1 receptors, regulates and turns down the neurobiology of pain at many different physiological levels, from the primary nerve signals to blocking the release of inflammatory mediators to the perception of pain and emotional perseverating on pain. Cannabinoids interact in all these ways. And of course, there's great molecular detail. I've just grabbed a graphic from this company, Phytex, but it's just gotten more sophisticated in its resolution. It's the same kind of story. And indeed, here's Rafi Meshulam still kicking, saying endocannabinoids these days are known to act in just every system physiologically that people have looked at. So if you go perusing the world of cannabis medicine, sometimes this biology is the worst enemy, because it seems hard to believe. There's been such a flipping paradigm of cannabis having no medicinal value, which was ingrained to us, to the modern medical cannabis movement and industry, which seems to say that marijuana is good for everything. And I'm a big believer in evidence. I think it's important that we in this field, whether it's a cannabis recommending physician or someone who's working a dispensary, not overstate things, but literally there's a mountain of preclinical research and evidence to suggest that because of how the endocannabinoid system works to maintain balance, and because THC acts so similarly to anandamide, these endogenous chemicals, that all of these potential therapeutic values are reasonable speculation for sure. Oops, hold on. That's I've got a little, that's my narration. I've drawn some of these slides from, actually I'll skip ahead to this slide right here. Some of these slides, the reason I've got that slow narration is because I've recently made a sort of self-steering PowerPoint overview of the endocannabinoid system for the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. And this is just a picture of their webpage where people could download this course freestanding or as a curriculum for continuing medical education. Because the endocannabinoid system is important. Now,
Oh no, I think he's frozen again. Well, can anybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Marnie.
Oh,
I can
and
hear
he
you.
says, happened again.
Oh.
Oh my.
Good.
Well, so as you had said, KJ, if he can't come right back on, then we'll probably work to wrap things up, but hopefully he can come back on and answer questions. Perhaps his talk will just be done. Oh, let's see. Try.
It'd be nice if he can come back and finish, but
I'd like him to come back and at least answer questions. You know, it's 7:35 right now, so
right,
we've got still
got
25
time.
minutes.
Yeah.
right.
So,
So everybody put something in the chat box there, tell us what you think so far. If we reschedule, would you sign back on for it? Would you drag somebody else along with you? What do you think?
How do I send a chat? Because when I wrote my chat, I didn't know how to make it go.
then you just hit enter.
Yeah, click on the
Okay.
thing at the bottom that says chat with the
Yep.
little balloon, and a box will open up showing the thing. There's a blue rectangle there that shows who you're sending it to. You should say to everyone. Type your message, and then you should just hit enter or your return key on your keyboard, and that should send it. All right, Lynette says she would come back. That's good. Hopefully
Awesome.
we won't have the technical difficulties the next time.
He's texting me back.
Okay. For those of you who are first-time viewers here to one of our West Virginia Wellness Life Lectures, if
So
you are on Facebook, if you're not, oh, there Dr. Gerdeman is back, it looks
I'm
like.
back.
There
So
we go.
frustrating. We just getting, it must be, I don't know what's going on with all the rain, but
So
we just
do
get
you
these little
just have like
flickers.
1 or 2 more slides? Is that what I'm seeing on your presentation?
I can stop. Why did that come on?
If you've got like a maybe a wrap it up slide, maybe we could do that, and then
And have some
people have
discussion.
questions. Yes, I think people are
Let's do
interested in
that.
asking some questions. So yeah, if you don't mind.
Not at all. So let me share. And am I back on?
You are.
Let me be super quick about it. What we know is, for one thing, there's more to the plant cannabis than just THC or just CBD. There is a whole family of cannabinoids that are created in the plant, and all of them may have compelling therapeutic potential. And so you will see people who are advocates of herbal cannabis rather than just isolated cannabinoids talk about this notion of an entourage effect of many cannabinoids working together. We do know some of the biological basis of this. In addition to all the cannabinoids, there are these bioactive terpenes that are the fragrant aromatic compounds that are found in many different plants. They contribute not only to fragrance, but sort of the, what we say, organoleptic aspects of the cannabis experience, how it tastes, how it feels. And cannabis users have been saying forever that they can predict whether something is going to make them sleepy or up based on smell and taste. And that's probably more that the real potency is driven by THC, CBD, and the cannabinoids, but a lot of the experience is steered, sort of the fine point of it, by the terpenes. Here's a nice article I reference by Ethan Rousseau again and Jehan Marcoux. And this is where there's a lot of discussion and excitement in the world of cannabis and how specific these different strains and varieties can be. Um, we know part of this is because there's more to the endocannabinoid system too. The cannabinoids, the terpenoids, they also act on these family of sensory receptors that we call trip channels. And all I'll need to say on that and wrapping up is that, well, it's just no wonder that this medicine is richer than just isolated molecules, because all of these pathways of physical sensation that are tapped into by the natural plant world, by heat, by cold, are literally sensory channels that are influenced by cannabis as well.
Well, maybe you'll come back. So anyway, Greg, you're frozen again. So looking in the chat, let's see. So it looks like Brandy has come because she's familiar with Dr. Gerdeman, as well as Marcy. And Marcy's talking about a cannabis nurses network. And I'm asking if you can to put something in the chat box, like with a website or something for that, because there are several nurses on here. I'm a nurse. Lorraine Pounds is a nurse, and there could be others. Oh, he's trying to call me. Shoot. All right, well, I'm going to mute myself. You guys talk amongst.
I had to step out a moment. What's going on?
It looked like we had, oh, he's back again. Great.
All right, so Greg, yeah, so you're just going to have to call in because you're stuck again. And thank you, Marcy, for putting that in the chat box. And so Lorraine, you knew about that? I just didn't know anything about it.
I've been a member, and they have an official training. Well, they're affiliated with a training where you can become certified as a nurse cannabis advisor type clinician.
Oh.
And I started the training. I just never quite got through it.
Gotcha.
But the organization itself has been around for about 15 years. It's not new.
How many years?
I'm remembering about 15. And they have a
Awesome.
very strong, board, experienced nurses who are quite experienced.
Well, that's wonderful. So Dr. Gerdeman is trying to get back on by phone so he can answer questions. So that's our hope. And
one of the big interests that I'm hearing, and I hear it a lot from aromatherapy students, is the CBD products for pain management.
mm-hmm.
And often a lot of these products are
I'm so sorry about how this has happened.
That's okay. Lorraine was just talking about aromatherapy students and questions that they're having.
A lot of some of the CBD ointments and even oral are laced with essential oils for flavoring. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes, yes, people are putting in whether and they're part of it is this rationale of getting the fuller hemp-like experience. But the company Tennessee Pharmaceuticals that I'm involved with is a CBD hemp oil company that's getting started. And in order to have a reliable and predicted and consistent experience with the oil, we do add natural extracted terpenes to the CBD oil, so that it's a standardized amount. But there's limonene from citrus rinds and those kinds of flavor. And across the variety of products that are out there, people use all kinds of either food flavorings or essential oil terpenes.
They are isolates, isn't that? Am I correct in that they're isolated? So when you get limonene, you're getting straight limonene. It's not necessarily lemon oil.
It is generally, yeah, it's steam distilled to be limonene,
Right.
for the most part. Now, a difference in that is when, people try to do really like cold extracted, botanically rich cannabis and make it a full spectrum hemp cannabis extract where it has some terpenes still present from its flower. But when it's added from, products do blend. I wouldn't say there aren't any products that don't blend something like a lemon oil, but ours doesn't. And I think most of the industry is using steam distilled terpenes from companies that are selling into that market.
Thank you.
Like doTERRA does a lot of essential oils.
Right. And I'll just tell you that, companies like doTERRA, that, there's a lot of aromatherapists on here. That is not what we're doing. That would be multi-level marketing. And, there are benefits to what they're doing and that they've got a lot of research going on too, and especially in doTERRA. But places like the Alliance of International Aromatherapists, which I and several other people on this call work with, we are more interested in the research going on that is not involving multi-level marketing.
Yeah.
And
most of what I mentioned doTERRA because I know it's got a big, following with marketers. Most of the cannabis industry is getting it from companies that have names like True Terpenes that are really manufacturing largely for the cannabis industry. I was recently I've been interacting with a woman with a podcast and a company out of Ireland called Lab Aroma, who's an aromatherapist. And I've had great conversations with Colleen Quinn, and I'm very eager to learn more about, for example, I would love to hear an aromatherapist oriented critique of the CBD hemp oils that are out there and of the notion of like the products that, again, I am newly on board with this Tennessee Pharmaceuticals company. And this is one of the oils that we have that is targeted. This one is targeted towards pain relief. It's a hemp oil extract. It's got CBD and some minor cannabinoids. And to it is added isolate terpenes. They're naturally extracted, but they're isolate terpenes from steam distillation that are like beta-caryophyllene, and also limonene in there, some linalool. How does that, does the aromatherapy community feel like adding those isolates in with a CBD oil? That a better approach would be from different botanical sources? Or I'd love to hear that comment.
A lot of aromatherapists are making ointments and salves for topical application for pain, rather than, although some are flavoring them and using them orally, but there's a lot. In fact, they're here in Colorado. I'm in Boulder. A lot of people are growing hemp here, but there are a lot of products with ointments with CBD, strongly CBD, but also have essential oils that are good for pain added to it to potentiate, to work, synergistically with the CBD.
But these
So,
are whole essential oils such as black
Rose-
pepper, or
rosemary,
balsam,
lemongrass,
balsam copaiba, things that are high in that beta caryophyllene are very popular to mix with it.
mhm.
Right.
And this is a
Right.
hot topic. Colleen Quinn talked at the AIA probably right before she talked with you. We invited her to talk with the Alliance of International Aromatherapists. And then, I saw that you had a podcast with her, which was very good.
I'd love the idea of making products more blended with sort of whole plant oils, to the extent that I could nudge our direction that way with the company. I'm really just getting started with. I've been hesitant to start putting out there the TN Pharma website because it's so brand new and I'm still figuring things out. My focus is more on the medical cannabis dispensary and on education around the space. It's just kind of tough because people think that the cannabis industry is hands over fist with money, and at certain levels it is, but getting a medical dispensary working in West Virginia and as an independent cannabis dispensary that's not part of one of these big conglomerates that are getting gobbled up, it's going to be hard to pay myself for a while.
Can I say something?
Nancy.
Well, first of all, I have to say the lab cannabis course that Colleen does is incredibly thorough. I actually I lost in it, and my chemistry background's pretty good. I need to go back and just replay a lot of it because it was so deep that because I really do want to learn at the level that you were talking about, Dr. Gerdeman, about the question of essential oils versus isolates. I know that I try really hard to buy only organic essential oils because I feel like if I'm going to put it on my skin, it's going to absorb into my body. I would like it to be organic. I don't know anything about isolates and whether they can be certified organic. And if I'm going to put something in my mouth, I really want it to be organic. And I have used a couple of years ago at the AIA conference, there were some CBD by mouth from Ananda Apothecary, actually. And I thought, well, I'll try them. I mean, they were giving them away and I tried them and they seemed okay. I can't say very much about them, but I just want, if I'm going to put it in my mouth, and you really need something to cover the taste of the CBD oil. It doesn't taste great.
Yeah.
Especially if you're an aromatherapist, you really notice how it doesn't taste great.
Yeah.
So I would be personally looking for something that I knew hadn't been distilled from a bunch of stuff that was sprayed with pesticides.
Things that come from citrus rinds in particular have, like orange flavorings. The industry thankfully is getting to a place where it's starting to be more, there is stepping towards, the FDA is actually going to start regulating. I'm not usually a super proponent for more and more regulation, but it's important that these products are held to food safety standards. And sometimes even when it comes to like orange flavoring, including some of these citrus derived, just what an isolate like limonene. If you can get pesticides get in there because it sticks into the rinds and the distillation methods to concentrate cannabinoids and terpenes usually bring some of those pesticides with them because they boil at similar temperatures.
Well, the cold pressed are important, but my understanding is the pesticides do not cross over through distillation. But with the cold pressed oils, they really need to be organic.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
With cannabinoids, with THC, some of the fungicides like myclobutanil will distill at the same temperatures as THC. So a lot of the Colorado cannabis industry was getting fungicides in their products because they weren't aware of how they were concentrating them. They would have flour that would test clean below detection, but once they extracted it and boiled it down, it would be over the acceptable limit because it was there. It was just low and it got concentrated through the process. So there's just a tremendous need for quality control and diligence on behalf of this industry, which is part of the reason I stepped into being involved with a hemp company, so that I can say, well, people ask me all the time what products I trust, and I want to be able to at least point to one and say, well, I trust this one enough because I'm involved in it.
Greg, can I
Which is
ask,
smart.
are you working with CO2 extracted cannabis? Yeah.
The company in Tennessee at present is using ethanol, cold ethanol extraction. I'm a huge fan of CO2, honestly. Is it something that you think is a good idea?
I think it's truer. I think you get a truer, uncontaminated product. But that's mainly what I'm familiar with, the CO2 extracted.
You can dial in CO2.
CBD.
You can dial it in very well, and you can collect those natural terpenes much better. If you extract even with really cold ethanol, you end up having to boil that off and you lose your volatiles. That's part of the reason why so many, including the company I'm with now, are adding terpenes back. But if I had our way to really control the whole line of production, I would like to invest in quality CO2 extraction, but it's a very high-end item up front. It costs a lot to buy those CO2 extractors.
Do we have your email address? Because I can send you the names of some companies here that are working with it.
Sure.
They just may be good contacts for you to see what's happening here. And the products are expensive. I'll say that, but I think
the CO2 extracted hemp oil products.
Well, there's some companies here. A friend of mine who's an aromatherapist is working in a store that's selling this line of product, and the owner grows her own hemp. So they have their own hemp growing situation, and then they're doing CO2s and then making product with them. But they are expensive. There's no doubt about it. But I think I have your email. I'll send you
I
some.
did put it in the chat box.
Okay, I'll send you
glgerdeman@gmail.com
to see what's happening in other places you might be interested.
That'd be great. I was recently, I actually was, one of my most recent companies was based in Golden, that I was working with out there. But unfortunately, that company just got the 2019 hemp economy. I thought that they had the foresight to see what was coming, and they did not. Had bad debt and basically went bankrupt.
I was going to say, there's also, I can send a Vermont source, an aromatherapist nurse named Lauren Andrews has been supporting, I think, a farm, an organic hemp farm, and they've been extracting for her store. So I don't, and so she sells quite a bit of it to the best of my knowledge. I bought a couple ounces from her. So, and she has GC testing on it, so she can actually tell you what's in it.
Yeah, that's important.
So for what that's worth, I will send it along.
That's great. I love to get resources like that.
So Dr. Gerdeman, just one final thing before we stop recording. So you have the Weir Pharmacy, and people just can't walk in off the street and say, hey, give me some of that THC, cannabinoid
Right.
stuff. What do they have to do?
Right. So when the medical cannabis dispensaries get opened in West Virginia, like Weir Wellness is the
And
name
they're
of
not
ours,
open yet?
they're
Is
not
that what
open
you're
yet.
saying?
They're not open yet.
Okay. All right.
West Virginia has had a very slow rollout. The applications, the dispensaries were just awarded in January. The growers were awarded in October. There are 10 growers in the state of West Virginia, and they are mostly all still closing on their facilities. So they're not even growing yet.
Gotcha.
I'm hoping that we'll be able to open a dispensary and have product on the shelf late summer. It all depends on how well they get moving. And of course, I'm getting into the retail game, right? It depends on how well I make relationships and what I get on the shelf. But to your question, patients will have to be approved medical cannabis patients that are registered with the state. There are only certain doctors. They can be found by looking at the state Office of Medical Cannabis website. It's part of the Department of Health and Human Resources. They have an OMC. And they have a list of the physicians. As with so many courses, there's so many states, there's so many barriers. Physicians have to take a course to get approved, which isn't a course about cannabis as medicine as much as these are the ways you can mess up. Don't do this wrong. It's illegal to do this. So they get certified, and then a patient has to have one of the listed conditions, which I don't have all of them off the top of my head, but these things, chronic pain is one of them. This is one of the silliest things really at root with cannabis as medicine, in that physicians who are working with it can't just make judgment calls. They have to follow a list of approved conditions that vary from state to state, and they're approved by lawmakers. But chronic pain, PTSD, certain neurological disorders like neuropathy, these are big. I said PTSD, Huntington's, Parkinson's, cancer. So some major diagnoses in West Virginia can qualify you, but you do have to have a documented medical history with your physician. You're going to have to pay for the appointment. You're going to have to pay to get the card. Coming into a dispensary like Weir Wellness, ours, people will be able to come into the front door to a reception, whether they're just right off the street or not, and get information and talk to us. But you'll have to be a card carrying patient or caregiver, approved caregiver for a patient, to get back into the dispensary floor. And in the state of West Virginia, in the law, if you transfer that legal cannabis to someone else, if I decide to give it to somebody who's not a card carrier, I am supposed to go to jail for a year. There is real teeth to diverting cannabis from a dispensary to someone who's not an approved registered patient in West Virginia.
I appreciate you letting us know. Jennifer, if you want to go ahead and stop recording, we can stop for the evening. Thank you, Dr. Gerdeman, for being with us tonight.
You're welcome.
This was a great
Thank you.
talk. No one needs to leave yet. We can talk after the recording